right, everybody. Happy Friday and happy Valentine's Day. Welcome to another episode of the Business Strategies Roundtable. Evan and I are sharing a little lunch date together. So we're going to get romantic and talk about some strategies. And he's going to share his entrepreneurial journey. And then the second half, we're going to talk a little bit about preparing for launching with a product, which Evan just went through the experience of, and the different pitfalls that you need to avoid or that you should be wary of. I guess you don't need to avoid anything, but you should probably try to if you want to be efficient. And some of the things that you need to be prepared to consider as it relates to market research, because that's an extremely important part of going to market, is considering your market. And if you want to reach them, you gotta know who you're gonna be talking to. You've moved very quickly through that process and have had some awesome success, and I'm excited to hear about how that's gone for you. And I'm also excited to hear about your story. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, appreciate it, Zach. Thanks for having me, man.
Tell us a little bit about your journey. So where
Oh,
did things start for you? Did you know that you wanted to be an entrepreneur growing up, or is this something that kind of came together? Tell us your story.
so, entrepreneurship stemmed for a handful of reasons. Uh, I always felt like I was a rebel child and went against the grain too. So that was kind of the foundational piece of it all. If I would have to point it towards like a character trait, so to speak. Um, but the second portion of it all just uh, I knew I had aspirations of a certain individual that I wanted to become, right? And I kind of already had like a sense in my mind of like where I want to be and everything, so to speak. But it's one thing to know what you want to be, but another thing completely different in order to operate like that individual, right?
Mhm.
And as I started to uncover like what I now success is defined by a shit ton of metrics, right? But for myself and everything, I look at entrepreneurship in particular as the success metric for myself in one aspect of my life, right? And so it's funny though because entrepreneurship transfers into all aspects of your life, personal, and professional, and everything in between. Um, but really, the entrepreneurship journey just started because I've always had chips on my shoulder. I was saying chips on your shoulder, cash it in, and just wanted to get into the uh, premise of having my own business, uh, having freedom. Funny, I thought I'd have
Can I
more
can
freedom.
I
Yeah,
can I dig into something? You
yeah.
said you were a rebel child, and
Hmm.
I was also, I don't know if I thought I was rebelling, but I certainly was, I think, disruptive.
Hmm.
What was rebellious? What was rebellious in nature about you when you were young? Because I think most entrepreneurs have some kind of willingness in them to go against the grain and create something that's new.
Hmm. Yeah.
So tell me about your rebellious nature.
Well, I mean, I think it stems from just a sense of, I mean, confidence and pride, if I'm being honest, of I don't want anyone to set the tone or the standard other than myself, too, right? And a lot of people have thoughts, but don't think about their thoughts, and like they aren't able to correctly stand on their own 2 feet and everything without interjecting like what they truly want to, right? A lot of people let their journey or their vision or their path be dictated by the influence of something other than themselves, right? I'd like to take a more direct and centered approach and be able to pull resources into my own like thought processes as opposed to letting someone else like kind of meander and dictate that for me, so to speak. I mean, classic examples like I mean, I was one of the first I was like one of the only kids in school that listened to GZ and Ti, for instance, and everything too. Like I was like big into that, and I was when I was young too, right? And it was always
What was the rubber band man?
oh Ti, yeah, 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 Yeah. And it just, stuff like that. And just, I mean, it was more than just one thing too, but the overall takeaway was, I wasn't looking for approval. And it's one thing to say I wasn't looking for approval, but it's another thing to act, maneuver, and talk like it as well too. And I did both, right? And so uh, now, did I have everybody agree or like me and everything too? But no, but I was okay with that too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think and I'm almost thankful that everyone wasn't always agreeable with like the route I went to, right? Because it wasn't like typical in a lot of forms and fit and fashion, right? But that's okay though too, because I was more concerned about Evan's approval than the external approval too. And I think that premise right there, I think is something that a lot of people hear, but they don't take true value in. Because once you take like true stock of yourself, like I wish people took more stock of themselves than in Tesla, and they might actually have something like really like foundational that they can fall back onto as well. You know what I mean? Because you can't short your own shit. You know what I mean?
I'm over the moon with that as like an explanation of rebelliousness, because the idea of seeking your own approval and being your own judge, I think, is one of the most important and challenging concepts. You said, I think people hear it but don't take stock in it. I think the reason that is because it really requires the individual to, like, you have to be able to consider you and your point of view. Then you have
Mm-hmm.
to be able to consider another person and their point of view. And then you
Yep.
have to be able to take that third step and zoom out and be the looker at
Yep.
the
Yep.
interaction that's
Yep.
happening and be
Yep.
like, well, what do I think about what I did,
Mm-hmm.
or what I'm doing, or what
Mm-hmm.
I've done, or what I want to do? And so many people, and I can tell you this from firsthand experience, because I grew up in a situation that led me to be in fight or flight often, just
Yeah.
because it was just the way things were. So I got to about, 24, 25, and I was in a great job, and I was like kind of ebbing in and out of fight or flight, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And when you're in fight or flight, you're in that first person. There is no
Mm-hmm.
considering the other person. There is no zooming out and taking stock of a scenario. And my
Yep.
point in saying all of this is, I think the reason that people struggle, to your point, to make connection with that point that you're making and really like carry it for what it's worth, is so many people are stuck in first person and they're not
Oh.
able to even
Yep.
consider the
Yeah.
other. And then they're
Yep.
definitely not able to consider, well, how do I feel about myself, my own approval? So many
Mm-hmm.
people are listening to somebody else and they're like, well, what does my boss think? And I was in this space for a very long time. What does my dad think? What does my mom think? What does my boss think? What does my coach think? What do the people in Toledo think? What do the people at Domino's think? You know what I mean? And it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
that can get you far, but people only know you as well as they're
The
able to know
information.
you,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Exactly.
you've been with you forever. So
Mm.
once you start doing your point, well, what is Evan?
Yeah.
What do I think of me? And the fact that you had that as that's your rebellious nature, like, no, 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 what do I think about this? Somebody did you right growing up, man, to give you that, or you just
Yeah. I
have
don't
a
know.
strong soul or something
I
along
don't
those
know if I
lines,
could
because
point
that's
anything. Yeah.
a
Yeah. Zach, you made
tremendous.
a good point. About like first person versus third person. One of the big things I've recognized with myself growing up, but is also extremely valuable to entrepreneurship now, is I consciously will look at third person viewpoint of myself and situations and surroundings. And I do it often too, right? I like everyone's got their POV, right? But most people don't consciously zoom out and like look at like what am I actually doing, how am I actually operating, who am I hanging out with, what am I listening to, what am I reading, like what am I basically exposing myself to, and like is that in line or incongruency with the individual that I'm trying to be, or is it not? And do you have the confidence or the balls to walk away if it's not, and everything too? And
Yeah.
really,
Or to judge yourself properly, to
Yeah.
stand with the cognitive dissonance of like, oh shit, I don't want to do that, or I don't want to keep doing that, or I've been trying to stop doing that. I've been trying to stop eating ice cream at 2 a.m. for however long. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah, of course.
it's uncomfortable to look at the reality of failure or dissatisfaction, but that's the only way that you can like be present and take the next step. You know what
Of
I mean?
course. And I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm holier than thou and always have it together, right? But that's the foundational framework that I try to attack a lot of decisions with, right?
Exactly.
No, I do not have it all together. I'm not going to sit here and act like I do, right?
No.
But like the framework, at least starts on a great like ground level too, right? You know what I mean? And you got to have a strong
Yes.
foundation building, right? Because I'm trying to be a tower. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You don't want to be regular residential. You're trying to stand out and shit too. You know what I mean?
Well, and you want to build something that lasts. And to your point about having a good foundation, if you're building your life, right,
Mm-hmm.
and especially we're talking about, well, we're talking about your perspective on intrinsic motivation as it relates to entrepreneurship, but intrinsic motivation, if you're just, I want to build a good life for me. Doesn't have to be a business, doesn't have to be anything. Doesn't necessarily have to be that I want to stand out, but I'm going to build a good life for me. If you're focused on that as a core aspect of your person, you're
Yep.
going to have a good foundation. What
Yeah.
do I think of my behavior, what I've done, what I'm doing, who I'm surrounding myself, the content I'm surrounding, all that stuff, to your point,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to have a good foundation, and it'll be a good foundation for entrepreneurship. It'll be a good foundation for building a family. It'll be a good foundation for supporting a community, because you're being true to you, and you're
Mm-hmm.
the only one who can be true to you, because I mean, your wife or your parents, depending on what stage of your life, are the people that have been around you the most, right?
Yep.
Other
Mm-hmm.
than you, and maybe
Yep.
it's 40% of the time, right? Because you're away, you're living your own life, so you got to take stock internally, and that makes sense. That you found entrepreneurship in that way. You
Yeah,
know
and
what
I,
I mean?
I don't, and entrepreneurship is my vehicle, right? Too,
Right.
right? Unapologetically. Other people will choose a different vehicle too, right? And that's not a right or wrong too, as long as you just lean into the individual that you want to become too. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you to be X, Y, Z and everything. Just if you decide to be X, Y, Z, operate like X as opposed to Y. That's all. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, magic. I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
So you had this rebellious nature. You were drawn to doing things your way. What did the career journey look like? Did you
Oh
do
man.
college? Did you
Yeah,
did
yeah.
you work?
So uh, I was high school. It's funny. I had like a 1.8 to 2.0 GPA in high school, which is crazy and everything to think about.
How did you feel with that? Because I have
That's
I
a good question, Zach.
because the system I don't think is set up. Obviously, you're highly successful, right? So you're being judged in a way by our
Hmm.
system that maybe could make an individual feel all sorts of different ways. And obviously, it didn't nick your confidence, or at least too much, because here you
Yeah,
are, a
yeah,
shining
yeah,
success. So, how the fuck did that feel as somebody who's
yeah.
obviously
No,
highly capable and intelligent in an uncomfortable uh, judgment space, potentially? Or tell
yeah.
me how it felt.
So I'm great question, Zach, and I'm incredibly passionate about this topic too, right? Because the standard for success of which they measure on and everything too, right? I mean, everyone's finding out pretty quickly that like real world applicable skills, knowledge bases, network, and soft skills and everything are really the difference makers in folks today, right? And it's funny, like no one had that foresight for me back in school. But if you were to ask me between all a whole host of attributes, having that, I'm choosing that every single time. That list I just rattled off. So there's that part too, right? So it's false information. being portrayed as the truth too. And like, I'm seeing through it all too, right? And everything. Cause the
At the
people,
time?
yeah, exactly. Because the people that are
Wow.
impressing that, unfortunately, the people that are impressing that
Yeah.
information on me aren't in the room that I want to be in, right? They're
Yeah,
here
you're
with
not
me.
impressed by
You know what I
them.
mean?
Yep.
Like, and then
Yep.
there's no discredit to that and everything too. I believe teachers and everything too. Hell, my sister's
But you're
one.
intuitive and a good
You know
judge
what
of
I mean?
people. So
Yeah, exactly.
you're hearing them tell you, and you're like, well,
But
I
I
don't know
mean,
if this is a good
so
mirror.
how so how going back to how it felt. So I think there's two different like trajectories you could take with it, right? There's like the saying, like life is 5% of what happens to you and 95% of how you react to it, right?
Mhm.
And yeah, I could have taken the mode or the mindset of like, oh damn, I'm not gonna amount to shit and everything too. Like, someone's gonna tell me what it is and everything, but uh, anything that can add fuel to the fire is a good thing, not a bad thing too, right? And so it just added fuel to the fire, right? Is really what it came down to, right? Because the decision was already made up that I was going to have entrepreneurship in my blood and everything, like before I even really got to school and everything too. Like
Mm.
I honestly didn't even know the term or the phrase of entrepreneurship too, but I knew I wanted to operate in a certain regard when I was young, right? So there was that, and there was no way, there was not a teacher, and there's no one in hell high water that was going to tell me otherwise too. Like there's that stubborn aspect, right? Too, right?
Mhm.
In like real like sense of like I'm doing this no matter what, right? So there's that part. The other part of it all too is just I like to utilize myself now as a case study though too, because I'd like to point it back towards people and everything too, because like uh, no, I'm not the most successful person and everything like that I know and everything, obviously, but I've gotten to a point where I'm like at least proud of my accomplishments up to this point and everything, and I'm far from finished. You can quote me on that, but at the same token, it's just I'm glad that I took it there and didn't let something I don't know, basically outside of me again, like kind of dictate where I'm going to be and everything. And I think because I say it now with ease too, but like back then, like oh man, the amount of like internal dialogue and beat up that I had with myself too, because
Mhm.
like when you hear that, you're like, all right, well, shit, now what? You know what I mean? Like, what is my actual path forward here, right?
Mm.
And when you look at all the options, too, quote unquote, then it just
Mhm.
doesn't look so sweet if you don't really go and get it, too, right? Like the alternative of just sitting there and everything. I'm like, I might as well like go for it, balls to the wall type of thing too, because like, what's the worst thing could happen, right? You know what I mean? Is kind of my thought
Yeah.
process on it all too, right? So I mean, a low GPA and everything too. Like I was like, well, it's all gravy from here, right? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
statistically, I'm supposed to be X Y Z and everything. Pick a laundry list of professions, credentials, however you want to phrase it, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and that just didn't sit well with me, right? So I didn't sit. I started walking and making moves and hustling, like you know what I mean. And
Yep.
so that's really how it came about. And then uh, I determined, like, really, I mean, I wanted to after high school. I wanted to do something right. Still, like that was I'm not tapping out just because of that, right? Like I'm
Huh.
gonna figure out a way to. There's people who have done more with less, right? So hell's my excuse, right? Uh,
Yeah.
you know, and
Yep.
like and the only thing I can do is utilize it now for a story to impress upon the younger generation of people that are in similar situation or something like that to be like, nah, like the hell with that. I'm still going to go and get it regardless, right? And like
Yeah.
kind of use that as like a light, so to speak, right? And that means a lot. But outside of that, to high school, I went to Lakeland Community College, uh,
Huh.
and but I really
So
didn't
you
have
weren't scared off from learning.
no.
You were like, I can. You were like, let's rock.
Well, I wasn't scared off from learning, and I definitely wasn't scared off from organizational structure, right? Because I recognize like just being in the room of collegiate like endeavors, so to speak, puts you in the right rooms of people that are also just
working on themselves,
actually trying to progress their life, right?
Yeah.
And it's really easy to progress your life when I've found when you have everyone else around you progressing, right? It's the other people that are like sitting on their ass with no motion and everything when you start to see your downfall. But if you're like in situations where people are actively trying to improve their situation or existence, you can't help but be motivated, inspired, but also the trickle down effect too of just the permeation of like, networking, thought process, mindset, like what again, what people listen to, what events they're going to, what they value, right? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like what they
Yes.
deem as a priority, right? Because you can say you have a particular priority and not operate within that priority. And then you see someone who's actually operating with the priority that you just talked about. And you're like, oh, damn, I got to step up now. You know what I mean? And like, I don't let that just go by the wayside too. After Lakeland Community College, though, I ended up trying to go to Ohio State, but I didn't have the GPA to get into like the business school or just really any school over there. So I ended up going to OSU Mansfield. And what was nice about OSU Mansfield, I don't know if you've been to Mansfield or not, but there's not a whole lot to do there and everything too. And I was also like out of my own.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I was out of my own at that point too. So those two, out of my own, and then really just in a different like environment and city too, like gave me a strong sense of self too, right? And allowed me to center like where I want to be too. Because when you're by yourself with your thoughts and you're alone in a new city and everything, you have a lot of time to think about your goals, right? When normally you get pulled in a bunch of different directions because you already have established relationships, right? But when you don't have established relationships and your social calendar, at least at the start, is fairly open, then you have a lot of time hanging out with Evan or you're hanging out with Zach, i.e. you constantly, right? So you start to take stock of your own individuality at that point. And then
can't avoid it. It can be uncomfortable. For some people.
Uncomfortable.
It was for me at least.
Uncomfortable is relative though too. Really uncomfortable would have been staying complacent in the same situation though too, right?
Short-term discomfort versus long-term tragedy.
90-day versus 9 years type deal. Yeah. And so OSU Mansfield, and then I was able to focus there to at least the point where and I was motivated because I'm like, I do not want to stay in Mansfield for the rest of my existence. Like, no disrespect, but I'm trying to do at least something else. You know what I mean? And so,
or see the world, travel. You know?
Yeah, exactly. And so that spurred the thought process of like, okay, now we actually really should focus because now I have a goal, right? Too, of like just getting out of this situation because I knew it had improved from the previous situation of Lakeland where I was at prior, but I knew like there could be more, right, and everything. And I don't even know if I'll ever have a tap on that, but I knew at that point like I definitely don't want to be here, right? Like, and so ended up focusing enough to the point where I at least got my GPA up to the point where I could get to Ohio State main campus and everything after some time.
Congratulations on y'all's championship.
Yeah, I know, right? That was crazy and everything. That team was so loaded and everything, honestly. Yeah. Ryan Day, I saw, gave $1 million to mental health and everything for Wexner. I just read that in the news recently. Good. That was one of the things that, I don't know. I mean, championship games are cool, but $1 million towards mental health, that's pretty
time
cool
to do
too.
it.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
It says a lot because he's like, well, I have this platform in this moment where I've got all this attention, and what I want to do with it is say we need to do a better job with this in the world. And I admire that.
And I commend him for that too, because that is certainly an overlooked topic though too, because mental health is the starting block for everything else in life too. And you can't try to will it any other way too, right? Your mental and emotional health and everything is the stem of everything too, right? So if you're going to make change in society, you might as well start at the root, right? So I love the fact that he did something like that. But ended up going to OSU Mansfield and then OSU main campus, and went for financial services with a minor in business, and ended up getting an entrepreneurial like communities, like after hours, completely voluntary too, right? They didn't force me to show up to the shit. And then I ended up graduating and everything too. It's funny, I barely graduated too and everything too. I had a class and everything that talk about now. I had a class and everything where I missed like a couple questions because it was a fill in the blank, 50 fill in the blank, like write it out structured test, not like a Scantron type of deal.
Okay.
It was like 50. It was 50 questions, right?
I don't miss that.
Yeah. So it was 50 questions, right? And well, it's funny, or shit, it's actually not funny at all. This is kind of a wild story. So I'll never forget. I was in Thompson Library at OSU. I was about to go into my final exam, and this was basically going to determine like if I'm going to stay another semester and everything, because like I've never been great at school, so I was on the hair of my chin even then too, right? You know what I mean? But it's wild is as I'm walking out of the library and I have 20 minutes before my exam starts, I get a call from my mom that says my dad's in the hospital and he has a 90% or so blockage in his heart, and my dad's dad died of a heart attack. So I'm going into my final exam, like trying to wager my entire existence and everything, or at least not my entire existence, but I mean, it felt like that at the time. Shit.
Yeah, you're having lose it. You're facing a real, like, potentially losing a parent and losing an immediate member of your family is one of the hardest things that you can go through in life.
Yeah, of
And
course.
that's meeting the moment where all of your work is culminating in a very important moment.
You have to perform.
And it's not necessarily a strength of yours. And you're probably going into it with this anxiety and this on top of the additional pressure of the moment.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Wow.
God.
So he has a stent in his heart, and he thankfully made it and everything too, right? That is like, I called my mom right after the exam and everything before I was even out of the building type of deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm like, I need to come there. What do I need to do, right? But thankfully still here. But yeah, I mean, at the time though, because like you hear that, right? And knowing that my dad's dad died of a heart attack, right? And I never got to meet him. I'm like, this doesn't sound like a good trajectory or plan right now. Cards their chips don't seem exactly in the right light or favor for this. So, yeah, definitely created quite a bit of angst and everything. But I took the exam, and they're difficult questions, right? They're like, Lindsay and Todd have, and then they list out their assets, and they're trying to retire for this amount of years and everything at this lifestyle, based on market fluctuations, come up with a game plan, right? And there's like that and a handful of other scenarios, 50 questions, right? And what's really hard about that is I had to think about numbers while I have this beating in my background, in my brain, like
and in your gut, probably.
That's straight. Yeah, exactly. So got done with the exam. Thankfully, completed it. I was there 3 times minimum. I'm like, do I just say the hell with it? Try to postpone this or something? Like, I probably feel like I have somewhat of a valid excuse, right? But ended up turning the exam, and I'll never forget. I missed and I still have the email to this day. Shout out to Dr. Sherman Hanna. I missed the test by like six points, right? And it's 6 points curve and everything too. And I waited patiently and everything because I'm like, I just need 6 points to pass and everything too, right? I'm like, just please. I'm like, I'm not trying to do a whole nother semester, right? And I was able get out of it and get it done and everything too. I'll never forget. I went to a Winking Lizard and slammed a couple Long Islands and had a burger celebration by myself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Because I was like sitting there because when I was waiting on the results, I was wondering like, do I go back to my folks and go check out what's going on with them? Do I stay here? So yeah.
Yeah. You just had everything going on.
Yeah. So
And it's
that's.
all out of your control. You're not
Mhm.
going to get there and be able to make sure things are,
Yeah,
you're
that
not gonna,
didn't. Yeah, I mean, I knew that conceptually or intellectually, right? But that didn't help me
yeah,
at the time and everything.
right.
My
Of
rational brain
course.
had gone out the window. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. It was
yeah,
all stress. Yeah.
yeah. So that's more or less the collegiate story and everything, so to speak.
And then boom, into entrepreneurship.
Yep. Yeah. So, uh, I started on the idea in college and everything too, right? And I was running a personal training business too at the time too. But I started to really get into it and everything. Really, like third, fourth year type of deal. Like kind of try to refine the idea, right?
Yeah.
And it, it wasn't like this like straightforward path, right? There were 3 weeks where I'd focus on it intensely, and then a month or would pass, and I wouldn't do a damn thing with it. Like it was a lot more chunked and everything than people may realize too, and that should give people a sigh of relief too, because I think there's this stigma attached to product development or entrepreneurship. So like once you're an entrepreneur, like it's all out 24/7, 365, don't do
Right.
anything else, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but I almost like slow walked and then started to jog and then run into entrepreneurship, right? Because I mean, I didn't even know, right? Yeah, yeah,
I think your humility a lot, and I mean, the main conversation we're going to have today from a strategy perspective is the fact that you had so much success with your launch so quickly. And I
hmm
think there's something to be said for that slow approach and your recognition of like, let me walk before I run here and let me put this together in my own time, as opposed to what is maybe traditional or the stereotypical thing for entrepreneurs, to
yep,
your point, to grind. You did it your way. Let me take it at my pace. And I mean,
yeah, and
that's interesting to me,
I definitely like took a longer timeline on it too. You know what I mean? Because
You
like
made sure to get it right.
yeah, well, I'm also I'm not sure. I wasn't sure, right? You know what I mean? And confident. I always say confidence is an earned trait, right? And I didn't have any confidence at that point, particularly at least on that endeavor, right? I
Yeah.
had some form of market, like this would be something type of deal too, but I never. I didn't. At that point, I hadn't raised capital. I hadn't gone through any real engineering work. I hadn't
Yeah.
really done any of the necessary grit work that's required for you to actually have a vote of confidence. So I was kind of more or less like tinkering and meandering with it too, to be honest with you, because I mean, it was it was an identity thing too. Like as much as I was like, I want to be in entrepreneurship. When it came, I'll be honest, when it came push come to shove, I was like, oh boy, this is a lot. This is a lot more than I planned or expected. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I would be sitting here lying to you if I didn't like at least come up with alternatives in my brain at some point. I'm like, is there something maybe a little bit easier? But the path of least resistance is normally not the path you want to go down. And I've heard that, and that sounds so corny, right? And you hear that, right? But actually, in principle, in real life, when you're faced with hard decisions, is when you need to remember that principle the most. And
Yeah.
give a shit if it's on the wall. It matters if it's an application. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
when it's easy and there's no decision. But when
Yeah.
it's hard and you're sitting there like, boo, maybe do I need to do this? It's not a maybe. It's you don't want to do that. And it's decision time to
Yeah.
do the thing or not. And usually you just until you make the right decision, you're just with it over and over and over again.
Yeah. Exactly.
I've
Exactly.
found. And I'm
Yeah.
stubborn, so I've been met with them a couple of times.
I believe.
Certain
Yep.
ones.
Yeah. So,
So you were taking your time. You said you were doing it in chunks, and then
yeah,
I interrupted and was like, "Hey, that's kind of interesting, related to
yeah.
product
So I
launches."
did, I did it in chunks, and then engaged with some students, and everything who I actually still keep in touch with to this day, about like doing some, development effort, on the product. Uh, and so we were whiteboarding in the OSU library, like just trying to figure this out, right?
That's
Um,
cool.
and then eventually, after going through the process, it was a lot of like they had like they were engineers, so they had to get tied into capstone too, right? Which is a full blown endeavor after class too, right? You
Hmm.
can't just like half ass that, so to speak, too. So it kind of just split our separate ways and everything on agreeable terms. And then and at that point, like I'm like, all right, what do I do now, right? You know, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right? So I'm like, all right, how do I develop a product? How do I build a product? How do I start a business?
Did you have an
Uh,
idea of what type of product you wanted to build?
well, I knew I wanted to do the automated silverware rolling machine after coming up with the idea and everything. Dishwashing, and then also the business competition, Ohio State. So I was in part of Business Builders Club at OSU. It was an after hours thing. I feel it's commonly circulated story. But first two rounds were just kind of getting up there talking about it. Third round was market research. So just went around all the restaurants and bars on North High Street, Olentangy River Road, try to see if there was some draw for the product at all. Like, do people even give a shit, right?
Hmm.
And so got some real world feedback, got some,
That's pretty important, right? How many
yeah, oh,
people
for
don't
sure.
how many people do you think don't do that because they have a technical solution,
Hmm.
because they're maybe a more technical, person,
Oh,
which is
yeah.
a
I mean,
lot of people
yeah.
in entrepreneurship, and in especially in like new technology, requires people to have some level of being technical. And
Hmm.
sometimes those people don't like to have customer discovery conversations.
Yeah.
How important is it, do you think, to have those early stage conversations around
So
your MVP or pre-MVP?
I've had hundreds, if not thousands, and I feel like I didn't do enough, honestly. You know what I mean?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah. Like that is something because the reality is if you don't create something that's valuable to the market in some way, form, fit, or fashion, then it doesn't matter, right? You know what I mean? Like you don't have something. You don't. It's
Yeah.
classic.
Yeah, then you
Classic.
just lose.
It's just classic like product market fit, and I'm still going through that process right now too. Like it's an evolving process to say the least too, and it takes
Well, you
multiple.
do it at stages, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because to get entry into the market, it's almost like you've got your piece of value, and it's like the sharp point on a tool, and you kind of break into the market. And if you want to grow a business, you have to keep adding more value. And it's either you do it by, informing more people in a sales team, and that's
Hmm.
part of growing your business, right? Or
Yep.
it's like, well, and when I talk about, well, you have to do some customer discovery there. Well, how do they like the sale process? How do they
Yeah.
like to
Yeah.
buy? How do
Hmm.
they like to have the conversations? You
Yep.
need customer discovery for that, because if you just roll a process out, well, you may
Yeah.
have people doing things that are inefficient. Or maybe you're going to roll another piece of your product out, or maybe you're going to roll another market out, or maybe you're
Hmm.
in Ohio and you want to go to Michigan. You know what I
Yep.
mean?
Yeah.
Each
Exactly.
stage of that requires a little bit of consideration and due
Yeah.
diligence.
There's not a whole lot of because I learned in entrepreneurship is about the efficiencies and focus. Right. Those are the two main principles that I'm constantly scrutinizing myself over. And I will say, without a shadow of a doubt, if you're developing a product or in particular and everything, go overkill on customer discovery. Overkill. There's not a whole lot of things that need true overkill, but that is one of them. I will say,
Mhm.
like
And
there
you
are
can
certain there are certain things now that I've gone through the R&D effort that if I would have known even prior and everything too, I would have expedited the process, expanded my market share, like really kind of added additional things too that might have been value, really focused on certain parameters on design that would have fit better into certain like metrics, so to speak, too. So it's not a perfect process, but it's process, right? Too, right? So when you're building something from the ground up, starting from literal ground zero, and like with blank canvas, like the world is your oyster, and that's a good thing and a bad thing, right? Too, because you're paralysis by analysis on multiple design decisions, and you're also trying to derive real value and at least articulate on that first and everything, and then work your way from there too. You know what I mean? And I think I'm learning is you'll never be at a point where you're like, yep, I'm good, I'm done, completed. It's always something that you're going to constantly be looking at too, right? Because you want to create a great like product and everything, or service that like has a resounding an exceptional reaction from like the people you're trying to engage with, right? Not necessarily because you're trying to sell the product too, but because you want people to be genuinely excited, because like I enjoy that. You know what I mean? When people are like, I'm really excited for what you have going on. Like I derive energy from that too. So anything I can do to like boost up like external validation in the market and everything, even outside of just like actual sales and everything too, is like a great thing too, because then it gives me a perspective like I'm really on to something too.
Yeah, that's a piece of customer discovery in its own right.
Yeah, exactly.
It may not be a client or a customer, or
Hmm.
but any perspective on what you're doing is a part of market research, because what the outside thinks about what a market is doing ultimately will impact how that market feels about itself. For instance, like
Yeah.
if the MLB started having baseball players play on tricycles, people outside the MLB world would have an opinion,
Hmm.
whether or not they watched baseball. That would probably impact whether or not that continued or didn't continue.
Yep.
And because it impacts the decision making of the people that are into baseball, right? Like,
Yep.
oh man,
Mhm.
every time I go to a game, my friends that don't even know anything about baseball talk shit about how silly it is because of X, Y, and Z. And that
You need to get better
impact,
first, but yeah.
well, you know what I mean. You
Yeah,
might
yeah,
have
yeah,
you might have gentle ribbing, or like,
yeah, yeah,
whatever. But
yeah.
to try to attempt to make the point, the social pressure, even from outside the market, can have an
Hmm.
impact on the market, and people outside the market have perspective that can be valuable. So to your point, that's a part of the process of customer discovery.
Yeah.
And if before I throw the ball back to you, if I could add one point, I got really excited as you were going through this. Um, you said, I feel like I didn't even do enough, and I started to get things enough customer discovery, and I started to get feedback part of the way that if I would have gotten in the beginning would have expedited X, Y, and Z. And if I could just add to that point that you made, you might have a customer in the feedback process give you a nugget that you'd never even considered, that might either be more profitable, might lead to the business's ultimate success, or might be a sub element or an additional element of what the business needs to be doing. But if you're coming at it from only your first person perspective and not getting any second person perspective, then you're only going to have your perspective, and
Yeah.
it
Did you
it
hear him, everybody? Zach's on point with that one for sure. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Well, everything you said, preach for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
well, thank you for saying that, and thank you for
Yeah.
letting
For
me cut
sure.
in there.
Yeah.
Uh, so I got a couple of questions here, and I want to be cognizant of our time. Do you have a hard stop at the hour?
Yeah. No, you're good. You're good.
Okay,
Keep going.
so we may go a little bit
Yeah.
through it.
Zach, one of the big things I love about entrepreneurship is like these types of interaction, because um, entrepreneurship is an anomaly in and of itself too. It's a actually relatively small subsection of the population statistically, right? Like not debatably, statistically, right? And so I am able to offer a glimpse that most people may not have a full understanding and grasp on. And I've had countless people from multiple podcasts, pieces of media, and everything that have came up to me, reached out, and everything. And that is something that I'll take to the grave with me, is something that I find like truly valuable within my own life and everything, even outside of the financial wherewithals and entrepreneurship and everything that comes with it. Yeah.
Getting to have the awesome conversations and the connections. Is that?
Yeah, of course. And
Yeah,
also,
I agree.
even deeper level too is like I'll eventually have kids one day and everything, and now they have a digital paper trail that their dad was a badass and everything. Check
That's
out
cool.
50 podcasts he was on. You know what I mean? He was really talking about what it really is and not what you want to hear. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's interesting, man.
Yeah.
I'll have to think more about that, and kind of muse on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's cool because as I go, I mean, from my perspective now, I hope to have a family and stuff someday. But to your point, a big piece of entrepreneurship is connecting with like-minded people. And
Yep.
you just said that it's a small subset, and I have in my own life felt out of place in some instances. I've
Mm-hmm.
always had very welcoming communities, and I've always been able to make friends. But sometimes I have felt like people don't always think about things as deeply, maybe,
Yep.
um, and you don't need to, right? But a lot of entrepreneurs do need to if you want to be successful.
Yeah.
So it's been such a gift to get to
Yeah.
have these types of conversations in my own
Mm-hmm.
world because it's like playing catch with somebody that understands how to play catch. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And like
Oh
really
yeah.
break down and consider an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been so much fun for me. And so again, thank you
Yeah.
for sharing that. And that's a good point as well because
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
it is
Yeah.
good.
I mean, I think whether it's entrepreneurship or trying to be a professional athlete, once you start to operate in the manner of the person or individual that you say you want to be, and then start becoming it, right? Then yeah, one of the biggest like catalysts for growth is like quote unquote finding your tribe, right?
Mhm.
Or like kind of surrounding people that are on a similar mission and everything that can share the struggles and trials and tribulations, and that can be industry specific, that can be like professionally specific, that can be personally specific, right? But it's really valuable for whatever you're doing to make a conscious effort to surround yourself with people that are like playing in arenas and everything that you find yourself in too. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
real value to that too. And so but there's also real
Yes.
value in playing in other arenas where they're either way above you or way below you or slightly below you or slightly above you though too, because then
Mhm.
it gives you a fresh perspective though too, because like we all have our certain thoughts though too, but like each section has a different way of thinking, right? You know what I mean? And so
Yes.
if you can take the nuggets, like you say, of like pieces of gold that people interject within conversation, you get to see through their lens too. You can then take that back to your own, uh,
Tribe.
basically Lego building block thing you're trying to build. And like, hey, I got a piece from this dude, I'm gonna put on my set type of deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. It
Yeah.
reminds me of my favorite Yu-Gi-Oh card, which is one every time it was either destroyed by something or destroyed something, it got a piece of that on its armor and got
Yeah.
stronger.
Uh huh. Uh huh.
I
Yeah.
love that card. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Cool, man. All right. Uh, so I want to explain why. So we're late. We're like late in this for me to explain why I have the tildes around properly. But here we go anyway, because I'm gonna start hitting you with my questions. So the
Okay.
reason that I like put properly around that is I think that so anytime somebody does a launch, it's typically, I guess maybe not anytime, but typically when somebody does a launch, it's from the heart. An entrepreneurial endeavor is a genuine,
Mm-hmm.
it's like usually a genuine thing. And typically there's a lot of consideration. So when I say properly, most people are in depth considering what they're doing, right? But maybe missing some things that are really, really, really important to lead to their ultimate success. So when
Yeah.
I say properly, I mean like not just like, did we spend a lot of time and did we really consider our idea, but what is it that we need to do before we launch the product so that we're sure that we're going to make it to the next step? Uh,
Hmm. Hmm.
how do we do it right? And I think a few of those things we've already kind of touched on, and it's in-depth customer discovery and in-depth market research, being willing to play in pools above where you are and below where you are, finding your tribe. Those are all some key things
Hmm.
that you might
Hmm.
need to do in entrepreneurship in general, but you need to do in a product launch, because if you're not talking to the people, your tribe, the people that are going to care most about what it is that you're launching, then you're not getting good, you know, golden circle or like immediate ring
Yeah. Yeah.
perspective.
Of course. Of course.
If you're not considering above and below, you're not getting some of that outside perspective. Are there other things that we haven't touched on yet that should go into that tilde properly window? And now that I've explained it,
So I think the big thing too is outside the mechanics of talking to target customers, uh, vetting providers and purveyors, like that are going to make sure that the quality control is in place, like just a whole host of things, right? So making sure those are in check too, right? So
yeah,
like not only their customer discovery portion of the customer, but also like it's a product in of itself, the quality, like everything in between, right? And everything, making sure that that's also there too as well, right? Um,
yeah, and
the
at
other
least
thing,
having a roadmap to improvement.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
You can have
So
an MVP that's not perfect before you launch, but if you haven't done a how is this like where's our strengths and weaknesses, it's going to be tough to get to the next step.
for sure. I mean, I will say though, you once you throw it out into the mix and everything, you're properly and you're prepared can sometimes go out the window and everything too, right? And
Yeah.
but being okay with that too, right? So for instance, like I'm on version 2.0 of the Roller Express, okay, right? Machine
Tell us
roll.
more about what the Roller Express is. We made it far
Yeah,
too
yeah,
far into
yeah, of
this
course. It's a machine
and
that automates the silverware rolling process for hospitality and healthcare space.
and so one thing that we talked about privately, especially when we first started, or I think in our first meeting of each other, was what a massive market that is
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for a couple of reasons. One, it's well, I mean, I got my start in lawn mowing and trash, but then quickly after that in restaurants. And there are, I mean, everybody that sits down at that table,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
almost everybody, unless it's sushi and we're having chopsticks,
Yeah, of
is
course.
going to have that rolled silverware
Mm-hmm.
to some capacity, whether it's a paper napkin or whatever.
Yep.
There are businesses that pre-roll silverware and ship the shit. I mean, it is a huge industry.
Yeah,
So
of course.
you've addressed, it's a big total addressable market,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
is a wonderful thing to get, something we're going to get into more, considering total addressable market. It's a wonderful thing that you did for yourself in terms of setting yourself to tackle a major problem.
Oh yeah.
And I guess in problem more opportunity. And the reason it's an opportunity is because all those waiters and waitresses, they don't want to sit down and roll that silverware.
Mm-mm.
They want to do what they're best at, which is gab with the customer. All
Yep.
those cooks and chefs and dishwashers, they don't want to roll that silverware.
Mm-mm.
But here's the thing, that shit needs to get rolled
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
every customer that's going to sit down.
Yep.
So we've got opportunity,
Yep.
right? Did you
And
see it that way right away? Or,
yeah, well, it's human capital, right? And everything too, right?
yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
like
time.
the value of a human life and everything is not something that could ever be discounted, right? You know, so I knew it was always going to be valuable due to that premise alone, right? Because
Yeah.
you're dealing with the aspect of time. You know what I mean? That's why like like Uber, like all these places are like a big thing because of time. You know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Time is the most valuable asset and everything too that one can control or have, right? And so I knew off that premise alone that it was going to be valuable and everything too as well. I'm also starting to learn too, like now that it's like 2025, I still can't believe it's 2025. I haven't got my brain around that.
Wow.
But as we're getting into 2025 and beyond too, with the AI and like really the like labor costs in particular and everything,
Yeah.
just
Got to be
keep
efficient.
going up because everything else is getting expensive, right? And so you're seeing what would normally be just considered a menial task and everything is under scrutiny and everything because it's subject to payroll dollars, which are like after food spend, like number two for most owner operators and everything,
Oh
particularly
yeah.
salary space. Yeah.
Yeah. Not to mention the fact that it's highly taxed.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean,
Yeah.
well, I won't get into it, but the cost of labor is more than the cost of labor.
Yeah.
And it's not
So,
always talked about because it's not a super popular conversation, but it's
yeah.
true.
So to go back to introducing the product, though, so we introduced it to Rusty Bucket in Dayton, but that was version 1.0, right? Now we're on version 2.0. The difference between 1.0 and then 1.5, which deployed at Town Hall, and then now 2.0 and everything. And I received so much valuable feedback from Rusty Bucket and Bobby and Jacqueline's team over at Town Hall and everything over there, like to help improve the product too and everything. Worth its weight in gold. I'm forever indebted to both of them. Everything comes with it, and it's just a matter of recognizing though that like we had value proposition and we had a way to go about articulating that value through the product, right? But the nuances of features, user experience, quality, operational issues or operational inefficiencies or efficiencies,
Yeah.
and a whole host of other things too, right? Those are things that we learned, quite frankly, on the fly, more or less. Like we had certain thought process and premise and direction too, but you really don't know until you're really out in the field, though, too, right? Because like you got to, I don't understand how like all humans interact with something too. Like I'm gonna take tender loving care with it because it's like my baby, right? But like someone who's like, I don't give a shit about this thing. Like I got to look into that perspective, and not because it's necessarily a bad thing, but because I want it to
User
be,
experience.
yeah, user experience too. Because I mean, the way I look at it is a product is really only as useful as how well the user can utilize it and everything too, right? Like
And
if
the
you,
users
yeah, I equate it to a gun, right? If you have a gun and it's got the coolest ammo and like best bullets and everything too, and it can penetrate like through like concrete or something crazy, right?
Yep.
But you don't know how to shoot it, you don't know how to reload it, you don't know how to cock the barrel, like you don't know how to do any of that, then
And
the
it
gun is,
breaks easy.
yeah, the gun is more intents and purposes, not valuable, right? So
Right.
the user experience is something that we like had premise on, but we learned, and we're always going to be looking at the user experience. I think that's something that people can always look under scrutiny too, because there's products I use to this day that user experience could be improved upon, like automated voice for like large corporations and everything. Sometimes that shit drives me nuts. There's
Oh,
got to be a better user experience for something like that too, right? Because
absolutely.
I'm done pressing one. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Right. There's that. And if I could add on to the point that you made, or the point you made, I'm gonna have to grab it again because you just reminded me of an experience I've recently had with automated systems. Oh, the user experience. So the user experience is, and I think this is an important point to make. The user experience is a couple of different needs to be from a couple of different perspectives of the buying individual. So
Yep.
there's the person that's utilizing the roller, right? Or that either has to fill it, or that has to maintenance it, or has to clean it, or whatever
Yep.
the function is. And they're having a user experience as the user.
Yep.
There's the user experience of the owner or whomever is responsible for the purchasing of the equipment,
Mm-hmm.
of how often they have to buy it, the cost of
Mm-hmm.
maintenance, how often they have to maintain it. And then
Yep.
there's also an experience of the manager or the owner or whomever purchases it and then has to teach whomever how to use it. And
Yep.
each of those different pieces of the process is a part of the user's experience. If
Yep.
every time I use that super special gun you're talking about, I have to it's really great. It's got all the best bullets. It does all these things, but I have to get a 9-foot pole with a big feather on it. And I
Yeah.
have to get it
Yeah.
in there, and
Yeah.
I have
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
then it
Exactly.
might not be all that efficient,
Yeah. Exactly. Yep.
or if
Yep.
I have to buy every time I, shoot it, I have to buy the whole thing again because or whatever. It's also a part of how you package and sell, how often you have to replace. The experience is not just at the time of purchase, or
Yeah.
not just at the time of use, or not just the time of first use. There's a whole host of experiences when you're working with a company.
Yeah.
Maybe you guys provide phone service,
Mm-hmm.
related to, or whatever, for related to its, or maybe you send somebody out there to fix it or something, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where they
Well,
have to
I
talk to
mean,
you guys. And
I
that's a
mean,
user experience and the customer
perfect
service
example,
perspective.
like an industry first we've done is we put a camera inside the machine and
Okay.
everything, which allows for a diagnose on particular service issues too, right? So we're
Yeah.
able to tap in like remotely to the Wi-Fi and be able to like see into a portion of the machine to see if there's any particular issues.
So you
Yeah,
could expedite fixing it because
yeah,
they wanna
exactly.
get it fixed, because they have, since they've been using your tool, they don't have servers that are expecting to roll silverware. So
Hmm.
they need to get that shit fixed because maybe
Yeah,
they
yeah,
don't have even people trained to do it. What are we gonna do? We need to get it
yep.
fixed.
Yep. Yeah, anything we can do to make it seamless for them too is like more or less the focal point that I try to look at any decision that I have
Yeah.
with it. Whether it's creating proper infrastructure through hosting YouTube videos, whether it's a QR code, for instance, that allows for people to pull up resources, whether it's world-class support, world-class distribution partners, world-class like manufacturers, and a whole host of other things too as well. I'm constantly looking at how can we make that better, because like you were saying, like it's not just from the point of purchase or the point of interaction, it's everything encompassing that too. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think it's about like having raving fans too. I forget who coined that phrase, but if you have like 10 or 100 raving fans, and you have a whole economy to pull from, though, too, right? And so
Mhm.
I'm working on building kind of that raving fans aspect too. You know what I mean? Because I think as the world gets inundated with even more like products, like endeavors or innovation, it's uh, it's cool to have the nice gizmos and gadgets and everything too, but like the seamless transition from, like you were saying, like the staff sense to the owner operator sense to the service sense. You want anything that creates less headaches, right? You know what I mean? Like anything that creates a headache is something that needs to be essentially addressed, right? You don't get headaches on things that don't need to get addressed, right? You know what I mean?
Oh,
So
God. Well said.
anything that I can do to mitigate that. And I'm obviously dealing with a lot of variables too, and I recognize and accepted that too. But that doesn't give me, nor do I want to have an excuse for it and everything too, right? So, I'm constantly looking at process, constantly looking at like from dumb it down, like how do we take it from someone who has nothing to do about the machine to now being able to correctly utilize it in like 5 minutes flat. You know what I mean? It's kind of like the thought process behind it all.
Yeah.
Uh, and then obviously the service side too and everything. Now you got to start from a level of basis knowledge and everything with that, obviously, because it is a piece of machinery too, right? But outside of that too, like, I mean, there's a part on the screen that's outside of like the normal interaction too, which allows for the service like text and everything to uh, have a touch screen that engages every point and aspect of the machine. Everything from how the gantry to like how the actual like napkin gets placed and rolled, and all the mechanisms and systems that come that together. There's now like a Rolodex that allows them to like pick and choose like on a menu, as opposed to trying to fuck around and figure out like this one. Now they pull up a nice screen and then they can individually select each one and then press a button, test and everything too, and then kind of go down the list and everything and like kind of do like a checklist, so to speak, too. So it makes for a more efficient service process too. And that's something that the manufacturer like spurred and everything too. So yeah. So
your manufacturing partner.
Yeah. So it's been a
part of having
effort.
Good partnerships.
Yeah. It's been a collaborative effort too, right?
Because they want you to sell more, right? That manufacturer is like, Evan, a lot of businesses like that set it up this way. We want to see you sell a bunch more because we want to make a bunch more.
Yeah, of course.
Here's that idea.
I have the hospitality perspective because I was in the industry for a decade over, and then they have the manufacturing like perspective, right? And they don't have my perspective. I don't have their perspective, but that doesn't mean they can't coalesce, right? Too, right? And so you can take the strong points from each and then interject it too, right? So for instance, I'm big on like, all right, you got to understand the environment and the ecosystem of restaurants and like kitchens and everything too, right? And really understand that too. Like you got to understand the rush, you got to understand slow times, you got to understand like people just not caring. You know what I mean? You have to actually really incorporate all that too, right? And like be really honest though too. And I have that perspective, right? Then they have their perspective of dealing with other companies that have produced various products and everything, and like the applications and serviceability and how you can basically make that more streamlined too as well. So it's a commingling of the parties in order to create like a balanced effort. So we hit not only the service side but also the user experience too. So collaboration is always the key.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's really cool. And you go into that depth. It's cool that they shared that with you, but part of it kind of tying back to your product launch or related to, doing that research is you're going to get, so two things. One, go into the depth with your product, because if you go into depth, like you go into depth so they don't have to go into depth. And then if you go into depth with your product, it's easy for them. Now you're differentiated from your competition. They either also have to go into depth or you have a differentiator. And it's not free to go into depth. It requires time and attention, which some people have more or less of in their organizations than others. So sometimes it costs more or less, right? Yeah. But if you can afford to spend your time and attention, like, you were talking about having done it in bulk efforts, right?
Yeah. Well, I feel like you can't afford not to, though, too. You know what I mean?
In the long run, you can't.
You know what I mean? Because like the impression of your product is more important than the product itself, right?
Right. Well, and then you do that depth for them, so then they don't even have to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
And that is even more on the customer experience side.
Yep. 100%. Yep.
It's vital, man. It's vital. Do you want to share some of the things that you wish you would have known, or some of the pitfalls that you ran into that you want to flag for anybody else? That's
So I'll go to there's a way to think about it, and then there's the application of it too. So the application of it, always overkill on customer discovery. I can't state that enough and everything. Really get out there too, right? And that's the fun part too. Once you really start to get people feedback too, you should look forward to that, right? That's one for sure. Extend timelines for whatever thought process you have in your head. by probably a variable a little bit more comfortable than you're probably used to dealing with or have dealt with in the past, right? Because society has this a predicated notion that certain things have to fall within timelines, right? But with entrepreneurship, when you're creating something from nothing, then you're really actually looking at it a different lens entirely too. And you're like, it's results oriented. It's not necessarily about the timeline. It's more so about the application, so to speak. And if you can get that done quickly or efficiently, more power to you and everything. I wish I was that lucky. Most people aren't, though. You know what I mean? And so being able to approach it from that regard on the application side. So recognizing that there's going to be an iterative process. You're going to probably have to spend more than you're probably used to. You're going to have to basically go into the process a lot more in depth than you were planning, but going into that with an open mind too. And then, like we were just talking about, the user experience, really, really, really look at that. I'd say customer discovery, user experience are one of the two, honestly, are the two like pitfalls to avoid, so to speak, and things that I'm learning about and trying to do better on, so to speak, with the like current company and product now too. So that's something I would look out for wholeheartedly. And then the mindset side of the coin too is, again, timelines, but also not everyone is going to love your product as much as you will and everything, and being okay with that too, and still being able to promote your own shit, so to speak. You know what I mean? Because you believe in the value of what you're doing though too. You know what I mean? And and just recognize that what you're getting into doesn't have structure, right? It by nature, right? Entrepreneurship by default doesn't have structure, right? And so recognizing that that comes with certain parameters too, where there's not always straightforward path and process and procedure to follow. So being able to handle the chaos and of the nuances is something that I cannot state enough is important to incorporate within your mindset and your mind frame of how you look at developing products and companies. Because if you come at it from this notion or this thought process or this stance of, I have this like flow chart in my brain, right, of how this is going to go, that flow chart's going out the window. Like, you might think it's not, and it may not on step 4 through 8. But then 5's going to hit you, and then 5's going to send you back to not even 0. It's going to send you back to -2. You know what I mean? And so just understanding that, you know what I mean? And just keep on keeping on too. I mean, the brand that I've created for myself, and anybody who really knows me can point attest to it. Hell, I had my old roommate for college hit me up when I posted the machine. He's like, "Wow, you actually pulled that off and everything too." This was long ago, and just recognizing like the steadfast commitment to building something great is always going to be better than meandering through mediocrity too, right? And trying to figure out if there's a more efficient way to do it. You know what I mean? Efficiency is not really what you're going after necessarily. You're looking forward for constant execution, and constant execution will bring about the efficiencies by natural default. But if you're trying to go at it from an efficient nature off the rip, then you're immediately getting into a situation where you're paralyzed on decision making and action. And if you're always trying to basically only go for efficiencies as opposed to execution, then you're going to be stifled on your own progress that you could have made. So focus on execution over efficiencies, and the efficiencies will eventually work themselves out through user experience, application, quality, a product and service, right? And then it'll come full circle, right? And so being able to do that happy song and dance, and making sure that you're okay with that too, emotionally, intellectually, personally, professionally, everything in between, right? That's why it's important to have not only a solid relationship with yourself, having Valentine's Day, but also like the general premise and everything of just making sure that you're surrounded by great people too, because you need people that are propellers, not anchors within your life too, because like it's going to hit you in the face, I promise you, and you're going to want to know what your get back up plan is. And
Yeah.
sometimes that resource of what your get back plan up, unfortunately, isn't always going to be you. It might be a different environment, person, perspective, but in more or less 9 times, or an article or a video, but more or less, it'll come from something outside of you too as well, and being receptive to letting that in while still having self-esteem tied to it too as well, because like that will get battered more than once when you're going through the process. So those are
Yeah.
the things to look out for, I'd say. Yeah.
I adore what you said about the plan changing. I'm also in a space with my own entrepreneurial journey that is certainly in the earlier stages. And to your point about being comfortable with the plan changing and that being a part of the process that you need to expect
Mm-hmm.
because you're in such a fluid space. I think that's a really, really great point. And I would add one thing to it, which is set a consistent cadence. In addition to those things that you said, which is have a good support system, have people around you to give outside perspective, um, make your plan, but be comfortable with your own self and willing for it to change. And then in addition to that, you need to know ASAP when the plan does need to change. So
Mm-hmm.
having a consistent system for
Yep.
analyzing how is the plan going? Are we on course? Are we on the right trajectory? Do we need to make an adjustment can be really important. So for
Yep.
myself, I don't always do it, but I have a nightly routine that takes me through some of my goals. It takes me through some of my objectives for the day, for the week. Am I on course? And if I need to make an adjustment or change things, I execute.
Mm-hmm.
For businesses, when I was in the Domino's world, we would look at profit and loss statements every period, sitting
Mm-hmm.
down religiously with the general managers and saying, well, this is where your money went. This is what the profit is. And
Yep.
working with them towards going forward. You hear about in technology spaces where you're having business reviews, with your customers,
Mm-hmm.
and you probably do that with the people that you service where you're like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
how's everything working with the silverware? All of those are moments where you can analyze, are we still on the plan or does it need to change? And if you can
Yep.
incorporate that into your everyday life or your every month life, then when the plan needs to change, you won't fall apart and you'll be able
Yeah.
to continue to be strong, put a new plan together and know, well, this is a part of the damn process.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing too is like interjecting the necessary changes and stuff like that too, right? Now that you have like now that you're in the arena, right? You're no longer sitting on the sidelines too. You're now in a situation where like if you take that iterative feedback and then implement it, you're now actually making real progress. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that even if it takes a little bit longer than you may have wanted to and everything, you still got there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's like, and if you set up a product correctly and everything, if you get there just once, you're good. You know what I mean? So it's like I mean, I was reading about like Nest thermostat and everything too, because they were talking about like a hardware as a services model, which is something Alphamated is really leaning into as of late. And it just talked about like the product development process and everything in between it too. But it's just like if you get the product down and then you're open to tweaks and changes and everything too, then the progress that sounds like annoying to deal with or frustrating to deal with or hard to deal with is actually just all right. No, you're just creating a more foundationally sound like endeavor all around too. You know what I mean? So it's
You're problem
really
solving.
yeah, exactly. You're problem solving. Yeah, exactly. And problem solving too, right? Not like problem pontificating though too. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that's what's really valuable, just kind of getting out there too. You know what I mean? You really just got to throw yourself to the wolves, is what I found too. And then it's like what do people say, like build an airplane while you're falling down a building or something like that, like falling out of
Yeah.
a parachute. Like that's
Yeah.
really what it is. Like it sounds cliche or like whatever, but that really is the premise and the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Requires that self-belief that we talked about in the beginning. You gotta
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
know who you
That's
are,
real.
know you're on the right path, and then keep applying it.
Yeah, of course.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share related to the product launch process, things that people need to consider?
Um, uh, Understand to think about even creating a product and everything too, right? Be grateful for not only yourself, but also the fact that you're even like thinking about approaching it or and actually doing it too. Like give yourself a pat on the back for that regard, because it's like not for the faint of heart. And like one of the big, like I'm gonna, as I'm getting this out into the world more and everything too, I know there will be a trickle down effect, not only because I'll be giving back people time, but also just the entrepreneurial story too, and like being able to help both out too. So you're doing something that's bigger than just you. You know what I mean? And it also really starts to get you to think honestly about like creating like generational wealth, like, and then how you can create other products, how you can create other businesses. And those are all phenomenal, abundant mentality, like, like, like thought process that if you can impress upon that not only yourself, but everybody around you, then it does nothing but good. You know what I mean? Because the world feels scarce in some regards, and then you get around someone who talks about building products, building businesses, or just really getting out there in any regard in their own life, and then you can't help but feel like motivated and inspired. So, like, just recognize that like anybody getting into this process is like you don't recognize it right now, but you're building not only a business, a product, and a company, but also a community and a following, either vicariously or through the woodwork, so to speak, too. So recognize the value of that and everything, and don't discredit that too, because you're making impressions on people that you never even thought you'd be impressed upon, you know. And then
Yeah.
the other thing too is just
Beautiful.
uh, come at it from a sense of play more than a sense of work too, right? Like, not necessarily because it's like childish or not trivial or whatnot, but because when you allow your brain to go from work to play or play to work or be able to meander or make the two like collide, so to speak, collide, excuse me, then you're allowed to now you now have a much healthier stance on product development too as well. And so you're now like in the how can I make this better because I want to make this better
Yeah,
because
because it's your baby.
yeah, exactly. And like but really lean into that though too, you know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
like there's a lot of like scary, I don't know if this is going to go this RZ and everything too. And if you attack it from the play aspect of like I'm just trying to create something that I would love to use and I think would be like something I can apply in my own life, or if I was that target customer, would I utilize this and what would I do and everything to basically improve upon this or and every metric too, right? Then if you take it from that aspect, then the business application of it all falls naturally too, right? There seems to be this like weird, I see it like between product and business, right? It's almost like the product is one thing and the business is an extension of the other two, right? But actually the product is a natural flow into the business because once you create a great user experience as a value proposition that's truly tied to an empathetic viewpoint, then the business side of it takes care of itself if you can get the numbers and the quality control and the process and production in place too, right? But
Yeah.
you need to start from that focal point of play and like thought process of like how can I create something that I love, you know what I mean, and enjoy as opposed to something that I despise, you know what I mean, and
Yeah.
constantly be looking at that too. Like don't let like the iPhone 16 or 17 just came out or some shit, right?
Hmm.
they're still coming out with new versions. Now, some people could say that's
It's new ways to iterate.
some people could say it's a revenue grab or whatever and everything. But in the grand scheme of things, too, just the difference between iPhone 1, 16, like, is real. And like most people would stop on iPhone 1 because that was a pioneering technology too. So recognize like whatever product
Well, and they
development.
certainly could have from the money,
Yeah, exactly.
but they didn't.
And also, but the big thing too is like product development. I've learned is something that you're going to be in the long game with too. So regardless of however you want to phrase it. So I recognize that and accept that too, right? And because if you recognize that my brain's never gonna let this tap, and like there's gonna be stop points at some point, but it's not right now too. Then you're giving yourself a little bit of a breather and everything too to come at it from a much clearer perspective. Because if you're trying to like beat your head down on like certain like mechanisms or metrics and everything, or certain quality aspects that you're trying to hit and everything, and you're never gonna, and this is it and everything.
You take the fun out of it.
Yeah, well, it's also like done is better than perfect too, right? You know what I mean? And so
because you can always reiterate.
Yeah, exactly. And well, I mean, perfect with no motion is worse than done with motion. You know what I mean? Because perfect, there might be the best product, but if it sits on a shelf with no use, it gets no use. You know what I mean? So the value's not there. So that's a big thing. I'm even doing more is just throwing the technology out in the world. I understand that it's a new technology too. The other thing I would give people a recommendation is offer demos, like free demos, because like seeing's believing too, right? You know what I mean? And so, or at least small pay trials, right? Some form of like letting people recognize, and that like with them being first in to allow them to tinker, give you feedback too, right? And really like be grateful and thankful for that too. Like Michael Bennett over at Chicago Gaelic Park, we gave him a version 1.5 after we tweaked it for Town Hall, and there are a handful of like feedback points and loops that he gave us and everything that we had thought to implement and everything, but it's phenomenal that he basically confirmed our thought process too, and so I wouldn't have had that perspective had I been like stickler on like a bunch of other things too, right? So just kind of lean into like care more about feedback, application, and user experience than trying to get like some form of like a partnership or something created off the rip or off the gate, right? Focus on how they interact with the product and enjoy the product, and what tweaks and changes you need to make, and keep going back to the drawing board again and again. Because once you do that, then they'll be excited, because not only will they have emotional buy-in because I feel like they've given their perspective and everything too, and whatever people give perspective on they care about too, right?
Yeah.
But the other token of it all is now getting into a situation where it's collaborative, and it's more, I'm not trying to necessarily sell you and everything a product. I'm trying to create a piece of technology or service and everything that would improve your life.
Yeah.
How do you want me to go about it, right? If you or me, and then let's figure out a way to make some monetary exchange and everything, because I want to be able to do this for you time and time again, and be able to allocate the resources in efficiencies in order for you to experience this over and over again properly. Yeah.
Wow. That was well said, man.
Yeah.
That was well said. I can't wait to clip that.
Yeah.
I can't wait to clip that. That's good stuff, man. I think the only thing that I would add is everything that Evan has shared as a strategy for handling the launch process for a product in this podcast today is also applicable to your brand or other types of businesses that you're going to do, because everything needs feedback, everything needs iteration, and everything has opportunities for growth. And if you can, whether it be a hands-on piece of technology like what Evan is working with restaurants on, or whether it be conceptual ideas with what I'm doing, in my organization. And there's some hands-on elements to it with our leadership program, but for the most part, it's a lot of strategy stuff. And now there's some hands-on pieces with websites and all that. But either way, the point about delivery and experience, user experience, taking feedback, collaborative nature, all of that stuff is applicable to your business, regardless of its delivery, whether it has a product or whether it has strategy based, or even if it's a gas station, right? Your product is the gas and the user experience is coming in and it being a nice experience. It's all applicable for when you're launching your business, that you should take feedback, get feedback, apply it consistently, and all of the wonderful points that Evan has made today. So
Yeah.
thanks, man.
Yeah, of course.
This has been a blast. This is a really fun
Yeah,
time.
yeah. I'm looking forward to watching this back and everything too as
Me
well.
too, man.
Because I always learn a lot when I go through this process too as well about myself and speaking style, and also, but like, because I want to again, hell, talking about refinement. Try to refine my speaking engagements and everything too, right? To
Yeah.
see how I can get better and everything too. You know what I mean? So I'll go back and scrutinize the product of Evan. You know what I mean?
Yeah, man. That's a good
Yeah,
point. That's a
yeah,
good point. Tell people about how they can so I love folks in the restaurant world, and there are plenty of them that I'm sure would be excited to engage with you and your tool. And then I know,
yeah.
so let's say there's somebody that's watching that wants to engage with you, work with you, or just connect and learn more. How would somebody work with Alphamated for in the business world, and how could somebody get a hold of Mr. Evan Duignan for other things?
Yeah, so website is www.alphamated.co. So feel free to reach out. We have an intake form and a contact form on there. Personal Instagram's Evan all day, and feel free to shoot me a message and everything too as well.
Great.
Yeah, those are probably two best ways and everything for sure. Yep.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise. And you've given me a bunch of perspective over particularly the past week or so that has been
Yeah, for sure, man.
very appreciated. And
You as
you're
well.
you're awesome, man. I'm
Yeah,
excited
of
to
course.
continue to get to know you more. For folks looking for more Tri-Unity Strategies content, I recommend checking out our website and the events page. We released a bunch of free and low-cost workshops. We're running our leadership and skills development program actively now. We've taken in a number of new program members over the past couple of weeks. We're really excited to see progress there. And we're going to be continuing forward with all of our awesome content. So if you're looking to learn more about Tri-Unity Strategies, check out the website, check out the events. And again, Evan, thank you so much for helping us make some awesome content and sharing your journey with us and your strategies. And I hope you have a awesome Valentine's Day and a
Yeah,
great
yeah,
weekend, man.
yeah,
Thanks
of
for
course. Oh yeah,
coming on the
yeah,
holiday.
of course.
Thanks again.
Appreciate it, Zach. Always.
Absolutely. Bye, everybody. Have a great weekend.